Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
Okay, it's Ron Crabtree here, your host of MetaPod, back for another episode. And one of the things that a lot of organizations have angst around is this thing called sustainability, right? And sustainability is massive, and you got to be really careful about how you define it. And we're going to get some help doing that. And then the other piece is this thing called ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, which are all the funded and mostly unfunded mandates we're seeing being pushed at organizations with respect to, labor laws and sustainability, environmental responsibility, social responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And most organizations and executives I talk to have a lot of angst around this. Like, okay, this is like an unfunded mandate, and it impacts our ability to be successful and be profitable. Because, again, we're focusing on those three key things that organizations struggle with. It's the forever labor shortage, the fact that digitization, digital transformation isn't going away, it's going to get worse, and we just have to do more with less. And along comes these mandates, right? So if you've wondered, like, well, okay, so how do I cope with that in the face of, finding ways to be more competitive? And if you're wondering, how could I make sustainability or ESG as a practice actually profitable? If you've wondered about that, then this podcast's for you. And I'm really happy to have Chris Workman joining us here. I kind of have Chris on speed dial when I think about, ESG and sustainability. And he's got I'll let him talk about himself here in a second, but he's actually sat, at the VP level in an organization responsible for sustainability, $10 billion plus size organization. So I consider him to be pretty informed. He's actually developed a pretty good, way of thinking about this problem. And he's got this little, I'll just put this up here for a second here, just see it for those on video, but it basically says sustainability as a tool to drive profitable growth. So I'm very interested in this topic because it's an oxymoron. A lot of folks look at ESG as an expense, but can we turn sustainability into an opportunity? So Chris, tell us a little bit about you.
Ron, good morning. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be a guest on MetaPod. A little bit about myself, a role you were referencing, I was the VP of Supply Management and Sustainability for Thor Industries, a global leader in RV manufacturing. I currently have moved over to a subsidiary of Thor, where I'm the president and general manager of a plastic extrusion business. A little bit about my background, started my career, sales development, marketing, those types of activities, transitioned more into operational roles, project management, supply management in the automotive and construction equipment space. Did a lot of work the last 10 plus years around P&L, operational excellence, acquisition, integration, turnaround activities. But staying focused on my more current activities, again, thought leader within the Thor enterprise around sustainability, and we struggled with those very same things. What do we do with this? That's
pretty cool. So your current role, does that have anything to do with recycling and reducing the waste stream of plastics?
Well, it's a thermoplastic sheet that we extrude that's used as a substrate in RV, office furniture. It has a lot of application in automotive. Our product, and what makes it unique, is it does have a very significant post-industrial recycled content, greater than 20%. And we're, of course, looking at ways that we can incorporate post-consumer recycling into it. So exciting opportunity. It allows me wearing a little bit of a different hat, but I'm involved in some of the same things.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. One of our customers is Advanced Drainage Systems, and I work with them off and on over a number of years to help them really think about how they could get that post-consumer scrap to work a lot better. They make all that pipe that goes underground for drainage from the home and in industrial applications and the like, and they're masters. They've done a long way to vertically integrating the intake of post-consumer scrap and industrial scrap and doing a lot of cool stuff with it. Probably should ask them if they want to be a guest on my podcast one of these days.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Yeah, so let's do this next then, if you don't mind. Let's just start, Chris, let's define what we mean by this, right? We could go Google this, but kind of define in summary, what do we mean by sustainability and ESG? Just to get us grounded a little bit to what we're talking about. And then from there, maybe you could share with us 3 different areas you would advise that an organization would look at critically and determine if this is a real threat or opportunity that we should pursue? So I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah, let me give just a very brief background. I don't want to make this a history lesson, but sustainability goes back for centuries. And most people will look to the Industrial Revolution as the start of sustainability as we know it. And it really was driven around, how do I make workers more productive? So early examples of sustainability are meal programs, giving people boarding and transportation to get to work. That led into things around child labor laws, safety standards, things that we kind of take for granted today. If you fast forward to the 70s and 80s with kind of the globalization activities that were going on, sustainability really took on a philanthropic flavor. And a lot of it came back to, giving back to my communities. A great example I think of, and I was involved in several ways early in my career, is the United Way. Very large corporate sponsorship. You saw them on NFL football games. Well, the United Way was really a means of giving back to the community, and today we would call that a sustainability initiative. If you kind of break into it, and I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, Ron, sustainability really has three core elements. It's environmental, it's social, it's governance. So the way I look at it is sustainability is the roof of the house. Environmental, social, and governance are the pillars, and the foundation is my business. How do I make it better? And again, I'm going to come back to that concept that you opened up with about the mandates and gosh, do I have to do this? The way I explain internally and externally sustainability, it's really nothing more than broadening the definition of lean. If you think about the 7 or 8 waste categories of lean, well, if I'm not retaining my employees and I have turnover issues, isn't that a form of waste? If I'm throwing something in a landfill that actually someone will pay me for, isn't that waste? So I try to take the politics out of it and calm everybody down and say, this is nothing more than a tool to make your business better. And it's really how do you approach it?
All right, well, that's perfect. And that really pivots us now to those 3 things an organization should look at. If you're interested in sustainability as a tool to drive profitable growth, which to me is kind of an oxymoron, why don't you tell us one of those 3 areas you should really look at and help us understand why and how we look at those?
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. Believe it or not, well, maybe I should rephrase this. You may not be surprised that just as there are organizations that rate your creditworthiness, Moody's, there are organizations that rank your sustainability metrics. And what they're looking at, again, is those 3 pillar elements of environmental, social, and governance. Now, if getting into each of those categories, it's literally, there's dozens and dozens of questions and categories that flow into this. But I think if you focus on those 3 areas, you can identify where this is not necessarily a threat to my business. Hey, this maybe is a good idea. And what I'd like to touch on is give you an example within each of those categories, how we can use this as a means of making our business better. Ron, you and I have all been involved in the Kaizen events and the fishbone analysis and all those things. Well, we're typically looking at material cost, we're looking at labor minutes, we're looking at customer requirements. But an enterprise is certainly more deep than that. And I want to leave with our audience that think of it as a tool to get a little bit broader and deeper about how does your business operate.
Okay. So give us a specific example of something you've done that we could relate to in each of those 3 categories.
Sure.
Our audience can relate to.
Absolutely. So if you look at environmental, it's typically, if you go in and you start kind of researching this, it's typically divided into 4 categories. You have risk and opportunity, carbon and climate, natural resources, waste and toxicity. So when you mention reporting requirements in Europe in particular, that's really focused on the carbon and climate piece. It can seem daunting and overwhelming, but if you do an energy audit and you look at your efficiency around energy, you work with your utility providers and you understand whether it be cubic meters of gas or kilowatts of electricity, if you collect that data from the perspective of how do I save money by getting more efficient, that's going to provide you the framework you need to comply with those reporting requirements. But if we specifically look at, hey, for many manufacturing companies, a cost of energy is a significant factor. So there's some really simple things you can do in an energy audit. For example, LED lighting. We've all heard about it. We all know about it. But I've done projects on large-scale manufacturing environments, internal and external, where the savings was so significant that it was payback in 15 months. So that's real cash in your pocket. Another example, my business, we do a lot of cross-docking and a lot of logistics activities. We're in a cold climate. You're making an investment in curtains or quick close doors. Those are paybacks in 9 and 10 months. So there's some things you can do that, this is cash in your pocket, quick payback. We talked a little bit about solid waste. I was working one of the Thor businesses several years ago, and we were doing a solid waste audit. So we were just following the waste stream. We started with incoming raw materials, and we followed it to finished product out the door. And we noticed that they used a lot of paper release backing, and they were throwing it right into the dumpster. Well, with a little research, we learned that there's people who will pay for that paper. So now that gets separated, it gets cartoned and crated, and we have a customer that buys that scrap from us. Same thing in that same factory. A lot of wiring going on. They're clipping wire ends and throwing it in the trash. Now we're collecting that, and people are paying it for scrap copper. So there's some things you could do that support being a better citizen, a better member of your community, but it comes back to cash in your pocket.
All right. So to summarize that, we need to ask questions of the organization. Show me the evidence, show me the data that demonstrates you've actually done these things, right? Walk out that whole waste stream, right? Take me out to the factory and walk me backward for every raw material or input. What happens to it? How much of it's going to a landfill, and are we challenging that? And very familiar with that. And then beyond that, show me the last energy on it. Show me the data and the information that suggests that we've actually evaluated our carbon footprint, and to really understand how we can possibly impact that, because this really relates back to future product development strategies. The company you're working in right now is an example of that, where you're creating a new product specifically around getting better intake of, the scrap waste stream and turning it back into goods that can go directly into, the end products again. So that's an example. But you have to really ask lots of really critical questions and understand how far along are we on these things? And then B, show me the evidence, right? And is this an area we need to spend more time on or not, right? To diagnose, are we on top of this, or do we have room to improve?
Well, yeah, an example of that, again, making this a tool to drive continuous improvement. I really want people to walk away from this discussion saying, I don't have to feel threatened by this. It's another tool in the toolbox to make my business better. I go through a very rigid 3-year planning process that we check in on quarterly, and we do an annual rewrite. Well, we've made these aspects of sustainability as part of that planning process. Have I thought about how I'm going to get more efficient in my energy? And next we can maybe talk about the social aspect of it.
Yeah, let's say
some things there. Again, it's broadening your horizons and your thought process. Yep. Well, Ron, when we talk about social, again, the power's out there. We're not inventing these audit criteria. They're out there. The social aspects of sustainability are categorized as human rights, labor, health, and safety, stakeholders in society, product safety, quality, and brand. And under each of those categories, there's a host of questions that you study to kind of gauge yourself. Another thing I want the audience to know is, particularly if you're a public company, there's just as your financial credibility is being benchmarked, your sustainability credit is being benchmarked. So that data is out there. You can compare yourself to peers in your community and in your industry and say, how do I compare to these different businesses? So you said something at the introduction, Ron, that I think really resonates and kind of drives the point of using sustainability as an extension of lean thinking. Retention. we all know how hard it is to attract and keep good employees. Well, again, under kind of broadening that horizon, these tools that I just talked about under the sustainability category get you thinking about, do I have a retention problem? Do I have a safety issue? And it gives you a framework to analyze them. But a simple thing we've learned in going through this and to kind of get expanding our thinking around sustainability as an extension of lean, turnover. Well, turnover, most people think turnover is driven by compensation. And actually what we learned is that's not the case. The two things that drive retention are, does a person have a productive relationship with their immediate supervisor, and do they feel welcome and needed?
Yeah, I'd like to butt in with a question for you. I was just recently the guest on a podcast, Helen speaking of supply chain. That'll get published not too distant future. And we were talking a little bit about sustainability, right? Because her big thing is around supply chain and sustainability of supply chain. And the question came up of, social, and how does that come into play? I assert that organizations have both short and longer term things to think about when it comes to social. And let me explain that. As an organization, for the short term, we need to be learning how to listen to what's going on in the marketplace. What do customers say? What do consumers say? What's the sentiment? And using that to gut check quickly our strategy. Are we still aligned with what the market's talking about? As we're listening and we're hearing trends, things coming down the pike, expectations, met or unmet expectations, we're then going upstream to our suppliers, who, by the way, should be drop-dead experts in what they do. They should be way more knowledgeable about the opportunities from an ESG perspective on the supply side, and tapping into them for, okay, so what are you doing about these things we're hearing, and what can you help us understand? What can we do as an organization to retool how we consume, retool how we make, retool how we service? Can we do things to have better, I'll call it the reverse supply chain, working better to refurbish and put back into play products again, and kind of closing that loop? Would you agree or disagree that would be an important element of the social part?
I totally agree. And I was just thinking, as you were saying that, from a supply chain perspective, in many manufacturing businesses, the majority of the solid waste going out the back door comes in the front door, and it's from our supply chain. So in my role at Thor, I had, again, the responsibility for global supply chain as well as sustainability. So it was really a perfect fit. I'll be honest and say it wasn't strategic, but it certainly did look like that afterwards. It was really kind of a need and an opportunity. But I rolled these things out to our largest suppliers, and there was a lot of hesitancy at first. But I'm very pleased to say that when I circle back to all those companies 3 and 4 years later, they have leaders of sustainability. They're driving these in terms of how do I make this better, and they're going upstream to their supply base. So I really do think, again, this is a tool to drive continuous improvement. And it's going to make you think about things beyond the bill of materials, beyond my labor minutes, and get you thinking about, how do I drive across the value stream a better business model?
Okay. That's awesome. I think that takes us into governance. I'm interested in this part.
Well, the governance piece, I'll be open and honest with the audience here that this is not my area of strength, but once you get into it and start understanding the elements of it, it makes a lot of sense. So the areas of governance that we get measured on, if you're a public company, are board structure, compensation, shareholder rights, audit, and risk. So I'm going to use the examples of, there's a lot of potential consequences of poor governance, agency problems, legal and regulatory risk, operational inefficiencies, financial stress, stakeholder dissatisfaction. We all know what that looks like in the boardroom if you have a large number of your stakeholder base concerned and upset with the direction you're taking the company. The example I'd like to cite is we've all been in those situations where we're trying to get funding to make a new product, or we're trying to get support to develop a new customer, and you can't seem to get an answer. I call it the scarecrow salute. They went that way. And if you think about it, that really comes down to governance. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so really the example I'll give, and this is something we did in my prior role, is we really focused in on delegation of authority. Is it clearly written? Does everyone have a job description? Do you have boundaries around your financial decision making? And it really comes up with a process flow chart that says, okay, if I have a new business opportunity and I need investment dollars, where do I go? Who's the ultimate person that's going to give me that answer? And my experience has been is when you have those guardrails in place, it gives people confidence to make decisions more quickly.
Yeah, I'd really like that. Ellen Willett with Exceptional Difference was a guest on one of my podcasts, and something he said that really stuck with me is this whole notion around the wisdom gap, what he calls the wisdom gap, and how successful are we as boomers retire out and all that knowledge, leaves the organization. What are we doing consciously to mentor and develop the leaders of the future and get away from the old habits of, controlling all the decisions to actually delegating and putting decision-making responsibility on the younger folks coming up through so that they get to bloody their noses, make the mistakes, and learn those things. You can only learn by doing, and by doing that in a safe, controlled manner, right? And so I really like what you were saying there. That's a critical piece of
Ron, I can jump on something you just said. Mentoring. That comes back to the social aspects of it. Again, employee retention, skill set development. If you come in and you do an audit of ESG and that social elements, they're going to ask you questions about how are you developing your talent? How are you translating that knowledge? So again, it gives you a framework to think about your business in a broader context than that typical balance sheet approach.
Okay, good stuff. So let's pivot now. I think you've done a pretty good job of defining for the audience what these things mean and what you go look for, right? To begin to understand how big of a threat or an opportunity is this for our organization? How mature are we? And then, there's the benchmarking tools. So let's flip now and just talk about, what do you go do? Right? What are the things you could propose that, let's assume there are gaps in each of those three areas you talked about. Well, we can talk about it individually or together, it doesn't matter. But what's your sage advice that you can't easily go Google? What do you do? If you find out you really have these sorts of issues, what should leaders next do?
Well, I think it starts with an honest assessment of where are you today. And again, certainly I can help companies with, there's really a framework out there that says, how do I make this assessment? So step one would be to understand where you are today. What's your baseline? And then I think you have to sit back as a leadership team and you look at each one of those categories in the business planning process and say, what are my biggest gaps in environmental? And, I'll make a simplistic example. Let's say it's, my energy costs are going up at 2x the rate of inflation. When you look at the cost of my energy, why? Is my output? Is it inefficiency? Is it process design? So I think, there isn't one answer for everybody, but it's going to give you data. It's going to give you the data to make informed decisions. Same thing with social. If you're looking at this and saying, gosh, I've got a 25% turnover rate while this company down the street is at 10%. What are they doing better than me? It's going to give you the data that says I have a problem or you have an opportunity. You may find, let's look at that in the positive. You may find you have outstanding retention at one of your factories. What are they doing differently? How do you learn from that and translate that knowledge to other operations? And the same thing with governance. It tends to be an area that we all kind of keep our hands off of, but that's where it starts, right? It starts with the leadership team defining the vision, defining the strategy, and putting the right people in place and empowering them to execute. If you've got gaps in those processes, you can't expect it to be any better downstream. So I would encourage people, again, this is something I can help with, or you can go out and there's certainly consulting organizations that'll take you through this. Start with a baseline of understanding it and do it in a timeline that fits into your annual planning process and expand it and make it part of it.
All right, let's put you on the spot here a little bit. Can you think of an example that you could tell a little bit of a story about without disclosing anything you shouldn't, where we were able to demonstrate success, and really back to the sustainability and drive profitable growth. You share a quick little sidebar story of an example where you actually were able to close the loop and have it actually be more profitable and more sustainable and compliant at the same time. Does any example pops to mind, just a for example story? And if not, we can move on.
Well, I'm trying, a lot of things are popping into my mind. I don't know if it's going to answer your question. Well, I don't want to mention the specific business, but we went in and we did the energy and solid waste analysis, and we came away with really a project list where we attacked both energy consumption as well as solid waste and disposal, and it had a significant impact on the bottom line to the tune of about 2%. So these were costs that we either avoided or improved simply by going in and doing things like the energy and solid waste audit. In another business example I'll use, again, I want to be respectful to the business and not name them, there was a significant retention issue. Greater than 50% of the employees walking in and walking out. And we really sat back and said, why? Well, part of it was market dynamics that we really can't control, but a lot of it had to do with policies and personalities. And we realized that we had some good people in the wrong place. And with some organizational changes, with some better onboarding and training tools, not only for new employees, but for existing employees, we were able to reduce that turnover rate from 50% to less than 15% in about 2 years.
That's awesome. And that flows to the bottom line, because the cost to hire sometimes exceeds the cost of having somebody on the payroll for a whole year when you think about that turnover.
Not only the cost to hire, but think about the impact on productivity.
Right.
Think about the impact on worker morale. Think about the impact on safety when you're constantly throwing new people on the line. So these things, that's why I keep saying this is an extension of lean. Embrace it. There's nothing to be afraid of.
That's awesome. And you did a great job of, closing the loop on it. So just to sum that up, we've got to reframe how we think about sustainability and ESG and compliance. It's maybe an unfunded mandate, but there's no reason we can't profit and be compliant at the same time and tell a great story to the market, right? With respect to our customers and the people who consume or the organizations consume our stuff, are definitely an opportunity for us. So Chris, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Yes. What I was going to say, Ron, is in my roles in the RV space, we do a lot of consumer analysis looking for that feedback of what's important to them. And I believe it was greater than 60% of our customer base that we collected data from indicated they specifically make a purchasing decision on the subject of sustainability.
Wow.
They want to know that their supplier of choice is a good corporate citizen.
That's awesome. So Chris, this has been fantastic. And, you've shared a couple of things today I hadn't really thought of. Gave me a different way of thinking about some of these problems. I really appreciate that. So if folks want to, commiserate with you or pick your brain or get your advice and probe a little deeper on this topic, how do they get in touch with you?
Right. My LinkedIn profile is probably the quickest and easiest way to get a hold of me. Certainly, they can reach out to you and please forward that to me. Otherwise, it's cjworkman221@gmail.com.
Awesome. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Ron, thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.